it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. I just got back from a really busy market at the co-op where we sell directly to florists. So I thought it would be a good time for me to do an update on my experience selling to florists. Now, if you've been following along my journey, you'll know that I shifted a lot of my sales this year to florists, and that was one thing that I wanted to do earlier in the year. I wanted to not only diversify who I was selling to, but pretty much set myself up so that I could predominantly sell to florists later on. So in the beginning of the year, I had posted 2 videos about selling to florists. One was doing your homework, understanding what types of florists there are out there, as well as knowing the prerequisites basically for selling to florists, which is quantity, quality, and consistency. Then in a second video, I talked about my experiences cold walking to florist stores, studios, and trying to sell them my winter tulips. So now that it's August, we're talking about a full 7-8 months later from that experience, I have a lot more to weigh in on. So today I want to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about when to deliver to florists. The second thing is cultivating the relationship with florists. And then last but not least, this post-harvest be the expert value add that you as a grower can definitely offer to a florist. So let's get started. So I really recommend that you watch that part 1 video about doing your homework first if you haven't yet. But high level, I do want to touch upon one thing that I talk about in that video, which is broadly speaking, there are 2 buckets of florists, or we can segment florists into 2 different types of segments. So the first one is retail florists, and these are florists who, when you walk into their shop, you know they're a retail florist. They have a big cooler, you can see flowers, they're selling it basically for like a special occasion, for Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, birthdays, and they might even do something called wire services. So 1-800-Flowers, Teleflora, whenever one of those orders goes through, those types of florists might get pinged, and then they sell flowers to basically anyone who walks in their shop. Then the second type of florist is an event florist, and these are florists who predominantly choose to focus on events such as weddings, bridal showers, baby showers, corporate events. So these are 2 high-level buckets, and within those types of florists, there's also different types of florists. So for example, in a retail florist setting, you can have someone who is selling celebration bouquets as well as flower subscriptions, but one wants to source more locally and one doesn't care about local and is really looking for consistency and ease and really keeping their prices low for their customers. So they're going to order wholesale and be less likely of a customer for local flower growers like us. So I talk about this because it's important to keep in mind who your audience is. So that brings me to the first topic, when to deliver to florists. And the answer is, not surprisingly, it depends. And it depends on what kind of florist you are selling to. So let's say you're selling to an event florist. Typically events happen on Saturday. Maybe they might happen on a Friday or a Sunday. If you try to deliver to them on a Friday, that's not going to be very helpful for them because not only do they need the stems earlier, but they're probably busy preparing for the event. So at our co-op, we sell primarily to event florists. And these are florists who come to our market floor on Wednesday to buy stems that they're going to need for that weekend wedding. Now, last year, the co-op was actually held on Tuesday, and the co-op as a board or as a group decided to move that date 1 day later in the week to Wednesday so that it could be a little bit closer to event day, but still far enough out to allow people to prepare and basically allow for that maximization of how that stem is going to look at its prime, but allow the florists time to work with the stems. So Wednesday might be a good day, maybe even earlier in the week if it's a really, really big wedding. So what this tells you is that you really do need to have that relationship with a florist if you're not selling through something like a co-op, because at our co-op, we have pre-orders and we also have a market floor. But if you're just doing a one-to-one interaction, you probably want to ask your florist, hey, do you have any events coming up? When are these events? When is the best time for me to deliver? So that's event florists. But let's say you're selling to a retail florist. So I do sell to another florist who is very local to me, and she does a hybrid of both events and retail. She primarily did events before COVID, and then during COVID, she had to shift her business model and now has a flower subscription, which is completely retail based. So I've been selling a lot of lilies to her. And for her, her preferred delivery date is either Monday or Tuesday, earlier in the week. It makes sense because retail customers can come and pick up bouquets any time of the week. And assuming she's not working a wedding, she's probably not going to be working that weekend. So earlier in the week works for her. All this to say, every day of the week is pretty much open. It really depends on what and when the florist needs those stems for. Next topic, let's talk about cultivating the relationship. So I myself had this thought that if I walk into a florist's studio and I present a bunch of beautiful tulips, lilies, whatever, they're going to be like, yes, I want to buy it. And then they're going to come back to me repeatedly and want to buy from me. That's not how it works. There is definitely a journey to cultivate that florist. What I find is that a lot of florists are dipping their toes, especially when it comes to local. A lot of them really do want to support local growers, but obviously not all local growers are created equal. There are some younger local growers who are less experienced, and there are some more experienced growers, right? So they're never going to come out and place like a $500 order with you. Instead, they're probably going to place like a $20, $30 order with you just to see what the quality of your stems are, how it is interacting with you, delivery, all that stuff. And so for that local florist that I was talking about, I've been selling to her in the beginning of the year, and I sold her tulips. And I would say at any given time, she really hasn't bought more than a couple dozen of stems at once. And I remember when I first sold to her tulip bunches, I was like, I'm going to charge you $8 delivery fee. Don't you want a little bit more? And, for her to ship stuff wholesale is going to cost her at least $14, at least from the local wholesaler that a lot of us use here, or that a lot of florists use here. So the $8 is really not that much for her. And the risk of buying a lot more stems and not being happy with them is a greater risk than overpaying for delivery. So I have seen over time, she'll say, hey, you know what, I'll take like 2 dozen of these, or I'll take 10 stems of this and that. And then she'll let me basically pick the colors, which is really, really nice. And I know that there is another local grower who sells to her and sells to her by the bucket. And they've obviously had an ongoing relationship for quite a bit of time. Now, I had interviewed someone named Jordan from Jordan's Flower Farm a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's over a month now. And she is also in her first year flower farming, but she has gone big and sells primarily to florists. So they do some retail through like farmers markets and stuff, but a majority of her sales this year are to florists. And she really, really cultivated those relationships months before she even planted a single seedling or started anything from seed. And she reached out to a radius of, or florists within a radius of where she was willing to drive. She introduced herself. This is all virtually, by the way. And then she would repeatedly send them messages and have them follow her on Instagram where they could see the progress of the farm. But the point was that she was consistent around sending availability lists. And over time, she was able to get florists to order from her. Same thing, they dip their toes, starting off with small orders. And as she proved that her dahlias and her stems were of really high quality, they continued to order from her, and they started ordering from her in mass. So what I'm really trying to say here is, if you've been trying to go the florist route and you really haven't felt like you've made inroads, and you feel like that you're targeting the right florist, meaning they want to support local, they're doing event work so that they can afford the premium that we charge on top of wholesale pricing, it likely is that you just need to cultivate that relationship. You need to be a little bit more consistent in your messaging, and you need to make that florist realize that you're going to be there week after week, even if they don't need you now, but when they do need you, you'll be there with stems and you can deliver to them when that need arises. Last but not least, post-harvesting and being the expert on the flowers. This, I think, is the most important thing, and it is one of the hardest things, especially for a newer grower. So what do I mean by post-harvest? I mean that number one, you should be following best practices for post-harvesting. So anything from a clean bucket, clean enough bucket for you to drink out of, to knowing when to use holding solution, when potentially not to how long should you hold something in a refrigerator, or let's say that you can't sell something for a few days, what flowers can withstand that, what flowers can't. You really need to dial in that post-harvest, and it's going to look different for every single kind of flower. I can tell you my post-harvest routine for yarrow is going to be super different than something from sunflowers to lilies to tulips, right? So you have to really become an expert in that, because you can do all of this growing and do a great job growing stuff from seed, getting it to bloom, cutting it, it looks beautiful, and then you screw up on the post-harvest, and then that florist either has a bad experience working with your stems, or even worse, a customer has a bad experience. So post-harvesting is like just table stakes, something that you have to learn. And I would say that one of the most important books for me in learning that is the post-harvest book over here. So it is a bit of an arm and a leg to buy it. If you're ASCFG member, it's a little bit cheaper, but also the book by Alan Armitage over here has some post-harvesting tips and tricks. So both books I reference constantly for post-harvesting. So along the same realm as post-harvesting, the other piece is being the expert in the stems. And another thing that was a little bit surprising to me as someone who primarily just grew flowers and I didn't really work with florists before, I was surprised to see that they don't necessarily have as much knowledge about the flowers as I would expect them to. And when you think about it, it makes sense. First of all, they didn't grow the flowers, they just bought the flowers. They're an expert at learning how to use it, how to design it, how to keep them out of water, how to keep them looking at their prime in event work. So of course they wouldn't know the other part of the bloom, which is really how do I grow it? How do I keep it looking nice if I'm not using it in a design for a few days? So this is significant value that you can add. At our co-op, we frequently get questions around, do you know how this does out of water? Do you know if I'm able to transport this for an hour out of water, especially for big foliage, things that are branchy, woody, and it's hard to fit into your car, let alone in a bucket of water. So if you know the answer to that, that's a lot of value add. But another example is last week I had a florist buy some rose lilies from me. Now our market is on Wednesday. She has a shoot today that she wants to use those lilies for. So ideally she would have come today to buy them, but she had to be at that shoot, so she bought them last week. And she asked me, how can I hold these? And so I said, lilies have a fantastic vase life, especially rose lilies. I would recommend, because when I sell to co-op, I like to sell the rose lilies a bit more open, since a lot of them are using them for event work in a few days. But since they were, I would say, about 65% open at that point, I said keep them in your cooler, and a couple of days before that shoot, like a Monday night, take them out, put them in room temperature, and they will continue to basically flower. And that's exactly what she did, and she had a great experience. So imagine if I didn't know how to answer that. She probably could, well, I mean, she could have figured it out, but if she didn't, she probably wouldn't have had a good experience with rose lilies, which is something that I'm already struggling with in terms of getting florists to buy more of. So all of this really helps in terms of, how do you say, like reflecting positively on me as a grower, and also instilling confidence in them to buy stems from me, because I can help troubleshoot things along the way for them if they don't know the answer to certain things. One more thing to add in terms of being the expert and providing that additional value add, I would say that for the most part, the florists who shop at our co-op for event work, they know that cosmos are not going to last forever. They know that, it's really an event day type of flower. They know that cafe au lait is not going to last forever. But those are a little bit more common type of flowers. So if you're selling something that is a bit less common, especially something that people are not going to be able to get wholesale, in my view, it's always better to educate the florist, especially if you know that something is not going to have a great vase life, if the petals are going to fall. So all of this contributes to building that relationship and really asserting your knowledge of growing and what stem or plant the florist is dealing with. They're not going to be able to get this level of information from a wholesaler. I mean, they might be able to call a customer service line, but it's so different than having that one-to-one interaction. So this is another place where buying local, direct from the farm or through a co-op, is really beneficial for that florist, especially one who is looking to source local. So anyway, I feel like I am constantly learning at this co-op, just figuring out what varieties sell better to florists, what varieties sell better to event florists versus retail florists. So I'll be doing some subsequent videos later on about that. But in the meantime, I hope this video was helpful for you. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Let me know how your experience has been selling to florists, especially if this is your first year, and I will see you in the next video.